Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results. Hi, I'm Perry Holly, a Maxwell Leadership Facilitator and Coach.
And I'm Chris Cody, Executive Vice President with Maxwell Leadership. Welcome and thank you for joining. I'm excited about today's lesson. We're going to really talk about, it's interesting that these phrases come up, right, that we're dealing with.
Great resignation.
Great resignation, the quiet quitting. And now we have another one that's come up. And I don't think that some of the other ones are new. Maybe they've just been titled. You know, I was talking to John Maxwell the other day, and we were talking about quiet quitting, and he started laughing at me. And he said, you understand, that's nothing new. Like, I've been dealing with that for 50 years. I've had people that would, just be on the payroll, and they'd already quit. This one is a little bit interesting because we're talking about what we call level 3 in the 5 levels of leadership, the production level, where the title for today is, Are You Experiencing Productivity Paranoia? And we're going to dive into that today. But first, if you want to visit maxwellleadership.com/podcast, and if you want to fill out a form and maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the executive coaching we do or facilitating some of the content with your team, we would love to hear from you with that. Also, if you have a question and or a comment, then you can leave that there. Or if you want to download the Learner's Guide, you can do that. So this topic today is something that is, again, a phrase you're probably going to hear more and more about. And Microsoft, to give you some data as we start off here, Microsoft surveyed 20,000 people in 11 countries and found that 87% of employees report that they are productive at work. Okay, so that makes me smile right there, 87%. Yet only 12% of the managers said that they have full confidence that their team is as productive when working, and here's the hot topic right now, the button, remotely, compared to when they were sitting in the desk in their office. And that's a big gap, right? That's a huge gap. 85% of the senior leaders say that the shift to hybrid work has made it challenging to have confidence that employees are being productive. The Microsoft report describes productivity paranoia as where leaders fear the lost productivity is due to employees not working, even though the hours worked, number of meetings, and other activity metrics have increased. Perry, what in the world? I think we could probably have several podcasts around this and topics. What is going on? What do you make of all of this?
Well, I was going to say same problem, new name, but
Yeah.
this is a little bit different.
A little bit different on this one.
But it's got some of the same things as leaders that we need to be doing. But you brought this to you sent me an email saying, have you heard of this? And I'm like, the next day, our marketing team sent me a question from a viewer, somebody either on the YouTube or listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
Brian had a very similar question. He said, our organization is really dealing with work from home, work from the office, or a hybrid mode, and leaders don't really know that they're not liking it. They want people back in the office, but it's a different world that we're in. So, this is really about a number of things. I was thinking through it and thought, what would I do? And I know you like me to come up with 5 things.
Yes, but we're back on the 5 train.
I'm going to give you 5 words.
Oh, I like it.
And you can then pick which words you want to talk about. But the 5 words I thought, if I'm thinking about productivity paranoia, would be culture, trust, performance improvement, accountability, and equity.
Interesting.
I threw that one in there for you.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start?
Well, for us, it's about culture. So let's start with this one, because I think that as we simply define the culture word, and we have a incredible training, the 4 dimensions of culture, that was created by Greg Cagle, one of our executive facilitators, and it has drastically shaped and shifted some cultures and organizations, and we've seen it happen. But the simplicity of it is, how do you think, act, and interact with your people and with your team? That doesn't necessarily mean just in the office, right? We're talking about this paranoia that's out there. And so this even happens when it comes to the remote team members. And it comes back to, for us, like, what are your core values? We always talk about when you are lifting somebody up, when you are giving somebody some praise inside the organization, make sure that you lead with the core value that they're demonstrating of your organization and then the individual and what they did, so that you're not maybe promoting the individual versus what you saw lived out as a core value. So for us at the Maxwell Leadership, one of our core values is performance. And so one of the things that we will do with some of our remote employees is we will talk about their metrics. We'll talk about their performance. We'll bring those to light in our team conversations. And so that people aren't going, well, so-and-so is just hanging out at home all day, and I don't really know, are they producing or are they not? Because the value of ours is performance. When they are hitting certain KPIs around their performance, I will make sure as a leader to say, hey, let me just stop for a minute. We talk about performance being so, and we're going to talk about this when it comes to the performance side of your word here, but this is a big thing for us in a core value. So I want to bring it up right here as well around our culture is I will acknowledge that, so that not only as a leader, I don't become paranoid, but the team doesn't become paranoid that there's a lack of that value being lived out by that remote employee.
Yeah, exactly. I think you hit it. We teach a lot about culture, and culture it always starts with your core values. And then there's a few steps in there that we like to make sure happen is that, and almost every company I work with has a set of core values. What you have to ask next is, are they just on the break room wall or on the website, or do people really know them? I was with a group a couple of weeks ago, and I was doing an exercise, and I said, I've been scouring your website looking for your core values. And my sponsor said, I know we have some. Let me see if I can find them. And so to me, that's a bit of a problem. But if you have core values and you have them defined, what do they mean? People are not allowed to make up the definition. We make up the definition. And then what are the behaviors behind those core values? Then when you think about people working at home, or people working in the office, or people working in coffee shops, I don't care.
Doesn't matter, yeah.
How we do things here, how we think, act, and interact. What would the core values say we do? And so we have one on performance. It doesn't say how you perform in the office or how you perform. We have a core value around that. So if you're actually looking for behaviors, which you should be, you should have defined behaviors for every core value. Then you don't have to be the bad guy to say, is somebody working or not working? The core values are the bad guy. The core values say, this is how we do things here. And Greg will say, culture is everything. It's like oxygen. You don't even notice it until you don't have it. And all of a sudden, now I'm paranoid that people aren't working. Then you're not living your core values on that.
Yeah, that's good. It's gonna happen, right? One way or another, your culture is gonna happen, and so you need to make sure that it's aligning with your core values. I was thinking as you were talking, another one of ours is partnership, and making sure that we are being a good partner to our partners, and make sure that we're exceeding expectations. And so it's another very well-defined intentional behavior behind doing that. And so we often will talk about that, no matter what it takes, no matter where they are. To your point, I love the coffee shop, or for us, maybe it's a plane, maybe it's a hotel, maybe it's whatever, because the amount of time that we spend on the road.
You're trying to figure out where I'm working?
Yeah.
You got a job up here. Right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, where in the world is Perry Holly today? That's the game that we play every morning. I want to go over all 5 of the words. I know you said pick a couple, but I like all 5 of them, and I think this is relevant. This next one of your 5 is trust. And this would be a little bit obvious, but I would say this. At times, I think everybody may have a little bit of a gap here where they go, is that teammate really, really you're having this maybe self-talk? And so when you're having that self-talk as a leader, or there's doubt there, is there a trust issue that needs to be addressed? Like what may be driving that in our mind? Is it the lack of trust, or is it something else in this productivity paranoia situation?
Yeah, well, as we say, trust is the linchpin to everything in your leadership. And I was troubled in this report, the Microsoft report, that they shared stories about some companies are so paranoid about this. They're tracking your mouse movements on your machine at home, and they can see your Slack screen that says you're active, or your email has a green indicator on it, and they're tracking to see if you're active. I also know some employees that have figured out how to put your mouse on your dog's tail or something. You're very active. This is concerning me, because if you're in an organization that has to, I don't know, trust, to me, again, it goes back to the core values and trust. I think about Stephen M.R. Covey's Speed of Trust, and that trust is really about your character and your competence. Are you good at what you do? Can I trust you in your work? And then, can I trust your character? And if you don't have character but you're really competent, I'm not going to trust you. If you're really competent but you don't have character, I'm not going to trust you.
Yeah.
So to me, it's the combination of both, and how that fits in. Go back to number one. It's why you say, why didn't you make trust number one? I think your culture drives everything, and trust is a part of that culture. It was intentional why I made that the second word. But to me, if you got the culture right, trust will generally fall in line, because we have that consistency. We trust each other. We know that this is how we do things here, and people can trust you in that.
Yeah.
But we did a podcast last week about you may not be as trusted as much as you think you are. So there are some signals that we can watch out for there.
Absolutely.
Hey, podcast listeners. Do you have a clear plan for growth? Achieving big results most often does not require big life changes. Small improvements over time compound into big results. Download the Maxwell Leadership app. It's the new free app where our expert guides and John Maxwell help you pace your leadership journey and set a clear plan for your own personal growth. You can also find all sorts of resources on the Maxwell Leadership app, including this podcast, information on upcoming events, and much more. Just search Maxwell Leadership in your app store and download the app today.
Well, the third word that you mentioned, I want to talk a little bit, is really around performance. And we've talked about this. Matter of fact, you and I were both with a client maybe a week ago now, 10 days ago, and having some of the best years that they've had over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, just record-breaking. And their performance is through the roof. And one of the things we began to talk about, and as a group with all their leaders, was this idea of, hey, are we allowing what's going on right now from a performance standpoint to create bad habits? Mm-hmm. And I think it's very interesting, because if that happens and the numbers begin to shift, if there's bad habits there and the numbers begin to shift, and they're going to shift, right? Everybody's going to go through it. Do all of a sudden your leaders become paranoid, or do you have that paranoia because all of a sudden your numbers are shifting, and now you think, well, it's got to be because of the bad habits, and now all of a sudden you're not trusting your people. Oh, is the culture right? And now you're just in a tailspin around this. And so I think leaders then get tightened up when it comes to then managing, and they just put the screws on even harder. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do, but that's what ends up happening when you have that paranoia and the performance begins to shift, because if there are bad habits that you've seen, then you think that's the cause. So with my comment there, it's like, hey, making sure no matter how good times are or what's going, that they continue to focus on the habits, the good habits of what then drive the KPIs in your organization.
Yeah, and KPIs, everybody's got a scoreboard.
Everybody, no matter what you do.
No matter what you do, you have a scoreboard. And when it comes to performance management, whether you're in the office or out of the office, the scoreboard is generally a lagging indicator. And by the time we get there, it's too late to do anything about it. And if you're nervous about people not being productive, by the way, I've seen a lot of people in the office that were faking performance.
No doubt about it.
You don't have to be out of the office.
That's right. You're exactly right. It goes both ways.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter where you are. So what I think the biggest jump I've had in performance management with the folks I work with is developing leading indicators that say for sales, for instance, I know that if we make X number of calls, X number of demonstrations, X number of customer lunches, X number of proposals, and we do that on a weekly basis. I know our team, they track calls made every week, because we know if you make those calls based on how things work, we'll get that lagging indicator. But if I look in a week, and I know you do this every week on our Monday call, you say, if we're not making that call, we're in danger now of making that lagging indicator. So I love this leading indicator idea for your work. No matter what you do, there are some things you do every day that if you did them, you'd be successful on the scoreboard at the end. So start managing those leading indicators, and that doesn't matter where you're working.
That's right.
You're at Starbucks. Did you make your calls? Great.
Yeah.
But I can tell, no, you have to track it. You have to be accountable. You have to bring people in and make sure they know those. But once you start doing that, my goodness, it doesn't matter where you are.
That's right.
You can be productive.
Yeah, that's good. And John calls this, thinking about your comments, the law of priorities, right? Leaders understand that activity is not necessarily accomplishment. So with that being said, I love your comment about what are those leading indicators that will drive it no matter where you're working. Mm-hmm. And not only as a leader do you need to set those, have a collaborative conversation with your in-office. I love your comment about there are people in my office that there's no doubt about it, right? You're like, you seem awful busy all day long, and I don't see the metrics showing up.
But a lot of business, but no production.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so work with the individuals depending on what their KPIs are that then again tie into the bigger enterprise. Make sure they understand all that, and have them speak into the activity levels that can lead to, hey, so if we do this, you feel like it will lead to that, and then that'll hit our KPI. Great, so do I. So now let's talk about the fact that we just don't want to be, active to be active. We're going to be intentionally active behind that so that the team kind of knows what's going on, and that's the direction that we're moving to.
Well, that kind of leads to the fourth word, which is accountability.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Which says that I've got the leading indicators, and we have our expectations of people. No matter where you work, I need to have that regular accountability. Now, let me tell you how we look at accountability is not who to blame when the lagging indicator doesn't hit.
Yeah.
Who's accountable for this?
Yeah.
No, it's ownership. And so if we've set it up right, we have our leading indicators. We have set expectations with our team. We know the goal. You're out of the office. You're in the office. You're at the coffee shop.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because I'm going to have a weekly conversation with you, tracking what's happening, what were your activities, what were your activity levels around these leading indicators, and I'm going to hold you accountable, which means you own it. So who owns it? You're making a personal decision to say, I own it and I'm responsible for that outcome. And if people know that they're responsible for the outcome, they have a leading indicator to hit every week, and you're going to hold them accountable for it.
Yeah.
You could be on the moon.
Yeah. And what I love about that is, to your point, it is something that from an accountability standpoint, who's owning it, right? I'm always amazed at times, and again, this will happen to me, especially when you get so busy. You start talking about ideas and this and that. You walk out of a meeting and you never assigned ownership of it. So then you get in the meeting the next week and you start talking about the progress that's made, and no one has any type of ownership, and so there's no accountability. One of the things I love that we do with our team is that we say, hey, who's going to own this? And then we say, okay, great, that they're the one that's going to report out on it. And then on a weekly basis, we're all holding each other accountable. It's not, hey, Chris or Perry's going to hold me accountable, whatever. It's like as a team, you have to report out, and we begin to have that peer-to-peer accountability. And so when that takes place, I think you have great accountability. And I think by doing that, no matter where you're working, you'll feel as a leader very comfortable with the progress that's being made, and you may not have that paranoia that this article is starting to talk about, which is the new catchphrase around leadership. Well, the final word that you gave us, and I'm interested how you put this in here. We're going to talk a little bit about the equity word that you added as the fifth word.
Yeah, I thought you might be surprised, because I was.
Yeah.
When I started thinking, just really putting this to thought about what would I do, is that we've been teaching a lot about inclusive leadership, and one of the last things I teach in inclusive leadership, the difference between equality and equity. And everybody doesn't need the same thing, and we're renowned for giving everybody the same. Everybody got to be in the office, equal treatment. Everybody's got to be at home, equal treatment. Well, what if different people, equitable treatment was some people need to be in the office, some people don't. Some people's jobs require them to be on site. Some people's jobs don't require them. Some people have personal limitations that would hinder them being effective on site. Some people would be more effective being at home. If you do some of the other previous four words, I think that'll take care of itself.
Yeah.
But The equity was that do I know my team well enough? Do I know the individuals well? Do I have that relationship that I know what you need? I just really want to encourage our leaders that are listening that if you know your people well enough, you know them personally, you know them professionally, and they know your expectations and that they have different needs. So many of the things in the study and what's happened since COVID and what people have figured out, it's why quiet quitting and some other things are happening, is I don't really need to work as hard as I used to. But people are thinking, but you say, well, I really want you to be motivated and driven and energized by our work. Well, you can do that sometimes by letting people have autonomy over their work, but not everybody wants that. So for me, it was, can I figure out what's the individual need, and can I value people equally, but treat people with equity? Is what John said.
That's good. Love it. As I wrap up and thinking about this, I love how you brought that in. There's two things that I think about, which is a phrase that I love to use that goes like this: listen, learn, then lead. And I would say that the first two are pretty hard for some leaders to do. We feel comfortable leading people, but do we really listen to them? Do we really learn? And that goes for me too, where your team members are at. I love how John says this, and it's why we kind of developed a course that you played a pivotal role in the content of, is this inclusive leadership. And the big movement out there has been, and I love it, is that we're out there pushing the diversity training, the DE&I traction that's out there. But for us, where we go in our DNA is, while there is diversity and we need more of it, we think leaders are missing the boat of inclusively leading the teams, the diverse teams they already have. And we believe that we're going to add value and unconditionally love all people. Now, in order to do that, you've got to listen to them, and you got to be open to learning, and then you can lead them appropriately. And I think if you do that, you'll have a much stronger connection with them that will hopefully reduce the productivity paranoia that you have with those individuals. I think the other thing I was thinking about as we wrap up, that I just want to bring up real quick, is that I think depending on the KPIs of your team, one of the things you're also going to deal with in this productivity paranoia is that certain job responsibilities are more effective in the office than they are remotely. And it's going to be a challenge for some of you leaders that are dealing with that balance of, it's going to be better for your team. And then there are going to be other teams in the same organization that maybe can work fully remote and it works really, really well. And then you got to deal with the dynamics of the employees and the team members seeing that and being able to work through and talk about these 5 things that Perry brought to us about the importance of that. And in your team being on-site versus being remote, or maybe your team being remote versus some being on-site. So there's all kinds of dynamics when it comes into this, and you're just going to have to kind of listen, learn, and lead through those times. But as leaders, we need to make sure the 5 things that Perry talked about, we are setting in stone so that we're not experiencing productivity paranoia with our team.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Chris. A reminder, if you want that learner guide that has all these notes, you may get that, as well as leave us a question or a comment or learn about the 5 levels of leadership. You can do all that at maxwellleadership.com/podcast. We're grateful for you being here. Always love to hear from you. That's all today from the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast.